Good evening. This week, as we've started to dive into the New Testament, we began studying, beginning with the Gospel of Matthew. Solomon opened it with a class last week, and I want to kind of dovetail with that and express some more thoughts from Matthew chapter 1. Um, Matthew is very much the gospel account to the Jews, and you see that throughout the entire gospel. It's the gospel with the most Hebrew phrases and figurative language. Although it was written in Greek, you could see the Hebrew influences within it. It's the gospel with the most Old Testament allusions and drawbacks, and it's the gospel that focuses the most on Old Testament prophetic fulfillment in Jesus. And that's exactly how Matthew opens. He opens in chapter 1 with this genealogy, tracing back Jesus' lineage through the line of David all the way to Abraham, showing to his audience that this Jesus was the one to fulfill the promises that were given to Abraham of a Messiah and the promises given to David. And in this lineage, there's a few standout things. And one of the things that stood out to me while reading this is there are four women listed, which is a bit abnormal because in Jewish genealogies, they typically trace the lineage through the men. But there are four women named in this genealogy. We have to kind of stop and ask ourselves why. It's out of the ordinary, it's a bit abnormal, and what is the point that Matthew might be making here? Well, we have to talk about who these four women are. The first one is Tamar, second, Rahab, third is Ruth, and the fourth is not named by name, but it's Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah. Four women whose stories we can read in the Old Testament, who we've talked about in this last year. Four women who don't necessarily come from the best background. Tamar was probably a Canaanite, and you could read her story in Genesis chapter 38. I won't go into too much detail, but she is someone who, not through the greatest means, through some sinful means, caught out unrighteousness from Abraham's own family, his grandson Judah. And then you have the story of Rahab, the prostitute living in Canaan, someone who is marked out among the rest of the people for destruction, but she turned in faithfulness to trust in God. She left her ways of prostitution. She left her Canaanite roots and became one of God's people instead. And then you have Ruth, a Moabite, another Gentile, a pagan, but she left her home country. She left her pagan roots, gave up on her pagan gods to be faithful to her family and ultimately be faithful to God. Then you have Bathsheba, who was an adulteress with King David, who sinned in many ways, but turned from her sin and became faithful, seeking to fulfill the promises of God and David later on in her life. Four women who most of the Jews of Jesus' day would write off as not being worthy of God's promises, not be worthy of the blessings of the Messiah. But what God shows in this genealogy here is that he includes people like this in his bringing about of the Messiah. He includes people like this in the lineage of Jesus. People who didn't come from the best backgrounds, people who weren't Jewish by birth, but their faithfulness proved worthy in the end. And if God can take people like that and include it in Jesus' lineage, how much more so in the blessings that Jesus brings about? Throughout Jesus' ministry, we see the Jews of Jesus' day combating with Jesus on this. Jesus would eat with sinners, with prostitutes, forgive them of their sins, and the Pharisees and other Jews would say, you can't do that. They don't deserve that. God shows that they are just as much a part of this as the rest of the Jews. The gospel is for sinners who need it. The gospel is not just to save the Jews, but to save all people, and Matthew establishes that right here. This message, this gospel was always for the entire world, and God showed that throughout all the Old Testament, throughout the life of Jesus, and throughout the birth of the church. So if you're sitting there this evening and think, I don't deserve to be a part of this. God wouldn't forgive me. God has showed that he can forgive anyone and make anyone a part of his plan, a part of these blessings. So if you wish to be baptized, if you wish to be a part of this church, be a part of the church of God, part of his family, he has made that offer to you. So if there's anything we can do for you tonight, please let us know now as we stand and sing this invitation song.